thank God they are here. I will say that I'm going to be speaking about the current situation in Israel. So I love seeing the little ones, parents, grandparents make decisions about what's best for your kids. Vayivater Yaakov levado. Jacob was left alone, and a being wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed." What does it mean to become Israel? It means saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." It means holding on to our dear ones and saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." It also means holding on to a world that does not know us or understand us, holding on to that world and saying to whomever will listen and even to those who will not, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And to become Israel even means holding on to your enemy and saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." This is what we, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, is doing with every interaction, with every relationship, with every point of contact and connection now. We are holding on with all our strength, and we are demanding a blessing. We are Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, who was first named Jacob. We are Bnei Israel, the descendants of Israel, who returned to the land of Israel with his 12 sons, who would then become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Jacob returned to the land with his daughter Dinah too. Poor Dinah, the object of an enemy's rage. We are Bnei Israel, the grandchildren of a patriarch who wrestled with beings divine and human and prevailed. This is our namesake, not Bnei Avraham, children of Abraham, the first believer, but Bnei Israel, the children of the one who struggles with God. This is our namesake. This is our sacred inheritance. This is our blessing. This is our burden. And we carry it still. Sometimes with heads held high, like the recently released hostage named Rimon in her pink pajamas, with her head held high in the face of Hamas. And we carry it still, sometimes stumbling with the limp of Jacob, but we carry it with a deep knowing, with a kind of knowing that is encoded in our bones, because we know who we are and we know where we come from and we know what this God-given life demands of us. Becoming Israel has been whispered to us in lullabies from the very beginning. It has been written in ink on parchment Torah scrolls from the very beginning. It has been reinforced on every holiday of our calendar, including Hanukkah just on the horizon, how to struggle and survive, how to set a table in the presence of my enemies, how to sing songs of triumph even when the triumph is woefully incomplete. This is our legacy sent down from Jacob turned Israel. In every generation, there is new evidence that the Jewish people must become Israel all over again. In every age, sometimes we forget, and it is put upon us. And we struggle to find the voice to say with newfound clarity and newfound courage, "I will not let you go until you bless me." This, good people, is one of those moments, and you know it. I returned yesterday from a rabbinic mission to Israel arranged by the Hartman Institute. 39 rabbis from across North America and from across denominations spent 3 days bearing witness to the stories of the wounded, of the survivors, of the families of the abducted, of the families of the soldiers. We volunteered where we could, and we listened for the Hartman Institute's thought leaders as they grapple with what this moment of Jewish history requires of us. It was only 3 days, but to be honest, it felt like 3 weeks, and it's going to take another 3 weeks for me just to unpack all that I witnessed and all that I learned. I'll share with you now not the big ideas, but the experiences, some of what I learned. I brought you, my congregation, with me on that El Al flight, and I brought some of Israel back to share with you now. First, I should say that I left for Israel unafraid of my physical well-being. But I did go feeling afraid of seeing that the Israel I know and love might have changed. I knew it would be a very different kind of Israel this time, and that frightened me. Some of you are my Facebook friends, and you may have read that I wrote from the taxi as it was climbing up from the sea towards the hills of Jerusalem. Baruch Hashem, I have arrived safely in my ancestral home. I feel very safe here, but I'm nervous to see that the Israel I know and love has so changed. I'm afraid to see Israelis so changed by the weight of the last 50 days. Their noisy, life-loving, confident character has been replaced with a haunting sense of grief and not knowing. The airport is far too quiet, short lines everywhere. The entire length of the welcome hall at Ben Gurion Airport is lined with the faces of the abducted. The few blank spaces stand for those who have returned. My cab driver tells me that his son is serving in Gaza now, as in the same unit he once served in Lebanon. He tells me his son is not afraid, but I can see on the father's face he is weary with worry, and he throws his hands up at the world that has gone mad. Straight from the airport, I joined my colleagues on a bus that went down the other side through the Judean hills, all the way to the base of Masada, where there was a makeshift school. And there we met grade 7 girls who were like all grade 7 girls, chatty and insecure, full of curiosity and so full of potential. These grade 7 girls were not like any other grade 7 girls I had ever met because they came from Kibbutz Saad. They held their breath for up to 24 hours in safe rooms there. They clutched kitchen knives in their hands while hearing the voices of terrorists outside their homes. When they got the signal, they fled with nothing but their clothes on their backs. They do not know when they'll be able to return to their homes, or if they will ever return to their homes. Their brothers and fathers are now serving in Gaza. What surprised me was that these young girls wanted so much to tell their stories. They wanted us to hear their stories. And as they told the stories, they were working on little stitching projects, which I imagine one of their teachers had given out as a way of meditating and keeping calm. So I pray that God will bless them as they sit and wait, literally, in the shadow of Masada, symbol of Jewish resilience and resistance. From there, we went to Kibbutz En Gedi. Some of you may have been there. It's beautiful, like the Garden of Eden, and all that natural beauty stood in stark contrast to the cruelty that was described to us as we sat in a circle under an enormous tree and heard from 4 survivors of the October 7th massacre. It read like a one-act play, each one taking a turn, sometimes playing off of one another, because they were neighbors from Kibbutz Cholit. They spoke through anger and tears, but they too wanted to give testimony. and they wanted us to bear witness to it. One woman told us that she was stuck in a safe room with her husband and 3 young children. When they heard Hamas entered their homes, they held the door as tightly as possible. And when it seemed that it might break, her husband said, "If they get any closer, I will go out and try to fight them off. Do not think of me, just close the door behind me." And the mother told her oldest son, "Say the Shema now." And he responded, "Ima, I already did." And this is a story told by a secular family in the modern state of Israel. How is it possible that a pogrom like this, which they knew befell their ancestors in Europe, could find its way now in the state of Israel, which was intended to be the answer to the problem? We returned to Jerusalem and we stopped at a 5-story building now known as the Hamal, Volunteer Central Command. While October 7th taught us the failure of leadership at the top, government and army, October 8th taught us about the extraordinary leadership coming from the bottom up, a grassroots effort. This was my chance to drop off the 2 enormous duffel bags that I had been schlepping from Toronto, filled with waterproof sleeping bags that were called for by the IDF because it's getting colder now. We were greeted at the Hamal by Adir Schwartz, an impressive young man who has ambitions of political leadership, and he is the general manager of this Hamal, an unpaid position for 5,000 volunteers. 54 days and counting, 10 million shekels worth of donated goods move out from this central command center. 20 departments are contained within the Hamal: a free store, mental health services, transportation and delivery, a housing office which has already placed 2,000 evacuees from the north and the south. Adir explains that powerlessness is the worst feeling. Since the attack on October 7th, Israel has been mobilized in ways that the government can't. And it is leadership like Adir that gives me hope for the future, because there is new leadership now in the wings, ready to take their place. On Wednesday, we went to olive groves at the base of Tel Gezer near Latrun. Field workers are hard to come by now in Israel. Workers from Thailand have returned home. Workers from the West Bank cannot easily get work permits. And so volunteers from all over Israel come to help the farmers so that their harvest will not go to waste. This is a whole other conversation about the economy of Israel now, which is in essence frozen. So 39 rabbis got to work, and we happily rolled up our sleeves and learned how to harvest olives. The little variety of olives will be turned into oil in time for Hanukkah. It felt good to be in the sun. It felt good to work the land. That afternoon, we drove to Tel Aviv and gathered at the plaza, which has now been designated as a place to support the families of the hostages and to call attention to the hostages. There are a number of tents set up there, each one for different kibbutzim, each one for different families to gather. The families of the kidnapped are met by words of comfort and just silent company. And also in the plaza are art installations, each one more moving and more haunting than the next. Our role there, when it became dark, was to begin to sing. And we started with just 30 people gathered around us. But in the half an hour of these songful prayers, these prayerful songs, ones you know like Al Kol Eila and Lu Yehi and Achenu and Ben Adam, and eventually Hatikva. By the end, we were met by more than 200, 250 people. The voices of our prayerful songs were like the magnet that drew everyone together from across the plaza and from the sidewalks. And I was asked to say a few words, and I told them about you. I told them about how over the ocean in Canada, how we pray for the hostages every single day. And I told them about Monday, when we will gather on Parliament Hill by the thousands that will come by trains and planes and automobiles. And we will bring a message to our government that Canada should stand strong with Israel throughout this war, that the hostages need immediate attention, and that hate has no home here in Canada. And they applauded to know about you. That solidarity, that sense of being one people, one family, one beating heart, one body, it means the world to them, and they believe in it. They draw strength from it. So we have to make it so by becoming Israel, from Jacob to Israel all over again. I'll share just one or two more anecdotes with you. We made 300 meals for soldiers working with special needs students at a remarkable school with remarkable teachers. And Thursday afternoon, we met with John Polin, who's an old friend of mine from university days, and his wife, Rachel Goldberg, extraordinary. You probably have heard her speak at the UN, speak at the Washington rally. So you know their story about their son Hirsch, who was stolen from them while he was attending a music festival. And when we met, Rachel told us that 80 years ago, it would be impossible to imagine that many citizens of Germany would be rallying behind a young Jewish man who was taken captive, and yet that's exactly what is happening now. Hundreds of German citizens are advocating for Hirsch's return. And so Rachel rationalizes that if she is witness to this moment that couldn't be imagined 80 years ago, then she can project forward and imagine that 80 years from now, Hirsch's grandchildren and Gazan grandchildren will play soccer together. When her world has come completely undone, her capacity to dream of peace is remarkably, astoundingly intact. And this is what I heard over and over again from Israelis. This war against Hamas is a necessary war, and it will be won. It will be hard-earned, and it will be won. And we still dream of better for ourselves and for the people of Gaza and for Palestinians everywhere. This is what I heard over and over again, including from a peace activist named Avi Dabush, one of the leading peace activists of Israel, well-researched, well-written, well-regarded, and he says, with his authoritative voice of the left, this war against Hamas must be waged for the sake of peace, for the sake of the Gazans, for the sake of the Palestinians, and for the sake of Israelis too. And the last gathering was one that was so hard I can barely speak of it. It was a sensitive and necessary ceremony to acknowledge the sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th. It isn't talked about often because it's so painful, but not talking about it can be even more painful for the victims and their dear ones. So this gathering, led by Israeli rabbis, in person and online, offered up songs and poetry and prayerful reflections to restore the dignity to the violated, to comfort those who care for them, professionals and relatives and friends. And I sat behind a soldier who was in the midst of his own recovery from the trauma of escorting women to safety on October 7th. Even during these days of pause, even during these days when so many hostages were returned home, there was no great celebration. There was a bit of relief. There was a bit of a return of some energy. But Israelis told us that they are not post-trauma. They are in trauma now. And they will be until this war is won, until they feel their borders are safe, and this can never happen again. So I'll conclude with this. Am Yisrael Chai is no longer a cliché. When we gather in Ottawa on Monday, and I hope to see you there, I think it's really important that we be there in significant numbers. If you can be there, if there's any way you can show up and be counted. When we sing Am Yisrael Chai there, as I imagine we will, we should understand that this is no longer a slogan or a cliché. Am Yisrael Chai is no longer a song we only teach to our children and teach them how to raise their fists up into the air. Am Yisrael Chai is a fact of history. Am Yisrael Chai is a God-given promise to Jacob. Am Yisrael Chai is a vow we make from Israeli grandfather to grandson, soldier in uniform. It is the very same vow we make from Jewish mother here to child, student on campus. Am Yisrael Chai is seeing young men like Milo come to the Torah with modesty and a strong voice, knowing who he is and to whom he belongs. Am Yisrael Chai is showing up for hard conversations with colleagues, with neighbors, to anyone who will listen. This is how we become B'nai Israel, all over again. And this is the primary message I bring back from Israel to share with you. We are the descendants of the Jacob Israel who strived and struggled with beings divine and human. And like him, we too, with God's help, will prevail. Am Yisrael Chai.